Hey everyone, Joe here. Thanks for joining me for another photo talk. This is Make a Date with Your Camera Part 2. After recording the first Make a Date with Your Camera video, I got a lot of requests for Part 2. So today we're going to take a look at some other options for customizing your camera so that it works better for you. As I've said before, you need to know enough about your camera so that it doesn't get in the way and keep you from making photographs that you're after. So let's take a look at some more functions that might benefit a custom button. The first one we'll talk about is exposure compensation. If you often need to adjust exposure on the fly, assigning a button to exposure compensation can save time. Now, this is useful for situations where, the camera's metering system may not capture the scene accurately. Now, most cameras have some sort of exposure compensation button somewhere. Not all of them, but some do. On my OM1, it has one right up on the top. On the OM5, yeah, there's one in the same place there. Now, this comes into play when you're dealing with one of your automatic modes, program, aperture priority, or shutter priority. If you're on manual, it's not going to do anything. You just adjust your shutter speed and aperture for that. But again, it depends on the cameras. Some cameras allow you to use the aperture and shutter speed command dials, usually on the front and on the back, to override exposure, while others will use the plus-minus button for that. In any case, it's a feature to know whenever you are shooting in any of the automatic modes. Now, the camera where I use that most is on my little OM5 here. I've talked about this before. I actually frequently shoot this camera in program mode. Shocking, isn't it? But program mode on this camera is pretty darn good, and there's nothing wrong with program mode, because you just look through the viewfinder, it's picked the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO for you, and you can adjust them accordingly. You see the numbers in between in the viewfinder. If your shutter speed's good and you just want to go up and down or open up or close the exposure, on this camera I can just adjust the shutter speed or the aperture and override whatever the program mode is. So in this one, I can do it that way, or I can use the plus and minus button. The next function you can assign to a button might be the grid display and level functions. Assigning a button to toggle the grid display or a built-in level can aid in achieving straight horizons and balanced compositions. It's amazing in landscape photography how often you think you're level, but you're not. So turn the level on and then make sure that you're paying attention to it. Now, personally, all of my cameras have the level and histogram indicators on at all times right in the viewfinder, but that's just a personal preference. For photographers using external flashes, assigning a button for flash exposure compensation allows for quick adjustments when you're using TTL flash. Again, some cameras have this, many do not. Now, I haven't talked about using on and off camera flash in quite a while. So if this is a subject that interests you, let me know and we'll see about creating some videos with that as well. The next function we'll talk about is bracketing. If you often use exposure bracketing, say assigning a button for quick access to bracketing settings, that can be very beneficial. When you have a shot where the perfect exposure is critical, having bracketing turned on can save you a lot of headaches. If you bracket because there's a lot of tonal range in the shot, maybe something that's actually beyond the camera's tonal range capabilities, if you want the camera to do all the work, you may also have access to something called HDR compositing mode. Now, both of my cameras here have that. Some cameras offer the option to shoot multiple bracketed exposures, which will then be combined into a single HDR photo right in the camera. Capabilities like this are often buried deep in the menu system and can have a variety of options. For example, on my OM1, you can choose it to automatically shoot 4 images to composite, or you can select 3, 5, or 7 frame shots 2 stops apart, or 3, 5 frames 3 stops apart. A similar capability is for cameras that can do high resolution modes, and most manufacturers, with the odd exception of Nikon, have the ability to shoot these modes. And what the camera does is it actually moves the sensor, either a half or a full pixel left, right, up, down, takes many shots, often as many as 12, to take whatever the megapixels are in the camera and then boost that. For example, again, my OM1 and my OM5, both are 20 megapixel cameras, but they both have the capability to shoot 50 megapixels handheld with this sensor shift and 80 megapixels on a tripod. In addition, you can choose it to save JPEGs or JPEGs plus the RAW files and at 3 different resolutions. That's a lot of options to try to decide on when you're out in the field waiting to take a shot. But when you program it into a button, one selection is all it takes to dial everything in immediately. Now this particular mode, I thought I was going to use it a lot. Turns out I don't use it as much. I thought I was going to, because when I see a scene that I feel needs a really big file, I frequently shoot a multi-stitch panoramic. I looked in my Lightroom catalog and found a bunch of images that ran from 40 megapixels all the way up to 107 megapixels, each shot with my 20 megapixel OM1. I recently sent a collection of these images for printing, and in fact, I have one right here. Now, showing this print by hand holding it up isn't really going to do it justice, but I just want to show you that you are not limited with megapixels. There we go. That's a 60-inch wide print off of my OM1. I can't remember, I think this was 4 or 5 shots stitched together to make this gorgeous panorama. If you're curious, by the way, I don't know how well it's going to show up on video. This was printed at Bay Photo, and I had it printed on Fujiflex, which if you really want pop in your landscapes, nothing will beat that particular paper combination. Now, the reason I bring up resolution is because we're going to talk about resolution in an upcoming video. Anyway, moving on. Let's get a couple more and then we can finish up. Another mode that's very handy is called focus stacking mode. Again, handful of cameras have this. Focus stacking mode is similar to the HDR mode, but instead of shooting different exposures, the camera actually adjusts the focus forward and back and composites them into a single image. This is handy for macro, product, and landscape photography because it gives you more depth of field than you might normally be getting with whatever aperture you choose. Now, once again, with this function, there are a handful of options. So if your camera has this capability, programming it into a button or a custom command dial setting will save you a lot of menu searching. Now, even though we've discussed quite a few options for customizing your camera to better fit your specific needs, there remain more customizations you can make. For example, if you shoot portraits, eye detection focusing is a really nice option to turn on. On this camera, you can turn on face detection, eye and face detection, near side eye focus, left side or right side eye focus. Now again, for me, this isn't something I usually do. For me, I only shoot studio portraits, so I don't have to deal with people moving around a lot. But if you're a wedding or an event photographer, this is a feature I would use. My point today is that if you have a camera made in, say, the last 7 years or so, I'm willing to bet that there are things in the menu system you've never used. You may never need them, but why not make a date with your camera and get to know each other better? When you learn to communicate, the interface and interaction between you and your camera makes for smooth operation, and smooth is always good. Thanks for joining me. Have a great week, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.